So would you like the career handbook to be more useful to you and your clients? The presenters are involved in a project that aims to update and improve the usability of this tool. Find out what's been done so far and add your expertise to the design. Jeff and Janet will also present on the preliminary results from the ongoing projects, which aims to help match people and jobs based on competencies rather than credentials. And session outcomes will include learn of some trends and tools in career development in Alberta, add input to improve the usefulness of career handbook, be better prepared to manage the trend to competency-based job matching. And for the Janet, I would like to say some few words about Janet. Before beginning of her work in human capital issues and public policy, Janet had a career in financial services and then gained expertise in literacy and essential skills development. Her recent research and writing has focused on the global move to a competency-based approach to workforce development and deployment. And Jeff Griffiths is a Calgary-based organizational development consultant who specializes in developing individual and collective competencies for the diverse range of Canada core industries. Welcome, Jen and Janet. Thank you.
Just a couple of words about the Canada West Foundation, my employer. It's a think tank based in Calgary, but studying issues of the West. Issues of the West. And so that's Manitoba through to BC. But we know that what's good for the West is good for Canada. We study 3 areas of research in the main. The first one is natural resources, the second one is trade and investment, and then my area is human capital. And as you just heard, I've been looking at the move to a competency-based approach to workforce development and deployment for the last few years. And my partner, Jeff.
Yeah. I run a small consulting company here in Calgary. We work pretty closely with Canada West, written some papers, we're doing some ongoing research. And most of what I've been doing since I got out of the military in the mid-90s has been focused on competency-based approaches to workforce and employment, mostly because when I got out of the military, no one knew where I fit. And so I've been trying to fit in ever since. And I guess that's actually a common problem because there's lots of people with lots of credentials that don't actually fit into the economy using traditional methods. So that's what I've been after for almost 30 years now.
Oh, that didn't get changed. Sorry, we rearranged the slides just before we started. Some of you might have been at our presentation last year. Was anybody here with us last year when we talked about the move to competencies? Okay, good then. So, we'll start with a little bit about what we see is going on in the world. Then we want to talk to you about what you see is going on in your world. Then we want to talk about these 2 projects that we've worked on, the Career Handbook and this project that we're working on with oil and gas professionals. And and in between, we want to talk about a lot of stuff that other people are doing as well. And then in the last few minutes, we want to come back to you and see what more can we be doing to help you be better in your world and your world of work. But what we know is that in this world right now, and especially in the world of work, and probably for you, is the only thing that's constant is change. That there's just so much going on. I see a couple of nods, so hopefully you're agreeing with me. What I'm seeing is obviously the move to the gig economy. We've got more people working on contract, working precariously, working 2 or 3 jobs, maybe working for completely working overload for a few months at a time and then having a spell of unemployment. Sometimes that's planned, so you can go to Thailand. Sometimes that's not planned, so you're constantly looking for work. We're seeing changes in materials and processes in the workplace so that jobs are changing as we speak, right? Job descriptions, the skills that are being demanded are changing. I was at a presentation put on by the woman who runs GE Canada, Elise Allen. She was talking about how in one of their manufacturing plants, they've moved from having 150 men, probably mostly men, working in a very dangerous environment to create the blades for engines, for airplanes. They have to maneuver hot steel, they have to hammer on it, they have to get it so it's just so. And what they've done is they've gone to the point where robots are doing that job. But they did not let anybody else go. They didn't replace the people with the robots. They kept the people on. And then they had to train those people on how to work with the robots. And that's not something that's coming, that's something that has actually happened. These are different skills altogether. I mean, working with machines is very different from working with people, but we also know that in many cases, the skills that are being demanded more are the skills that go along with working more with people. So our people skills have to be better than they've ever been. We know, too, that with globalization, there are changes. We've seen this, that the jobs have been offshored, but we've also seen jobs coming here. We're seeing jobs coming back. But we know that the whole world is working with the same inputs of production, except for their workforces. Our workforce happens to be relatively well trained, but it is also wanting relatively high wages. And so in order for us to be able to meet the demand for high wages in this country, we're going to have to keep adding to our productivity levels and our competition levels within the globe. And this is going to mean that we're going to demand ever higher and higher skills. Other changes I thought you might be interested in just came out this morning. There's a report out of ATB Financial with some economic statistics that I thought might be of interest to you, working predominantly in Alberta, I believe. Is that you? And that is that these statistics, even though we have been through a recession, the most recent news is that, hang on to your hats, folks, but we're actually out of the recession now. And we still, even through all of that, we maintained the highest wages in the country. In order to maintain the highest wages in the country, we have to be the most productive in the country. We have 12.5% of the workforce, but we only have 11.5% of the country's workforce. We're 12.5% of the Canadian labor force, but only 11.5% of the working age population. That's because we have a relatively young population. We had a lot of people in the workforce. At the same time, 166,000 Albertans are looking for work. And I know that that's something that you're feeling. But our unemployment rate, even though it is higher, has definitely come down over a while. We still have the highest rate of employment in the country and the highest rate of participation in the country. And these are statistics that I think are important to your world and the kinds of things that you'll want to keep up on. But here's the thing. The world in Alberta, the way that the jobs that are available have shifted from the goods producing, from that commodity world, from the oil and gas sector and manufacturing sector, to the service sector. And so that's a different skill set. That's probably the jobs as well may not pay as well, right? Some of the service sector jobs pay really well. Others are less well paid than the jobs in the goods producing. So just something that I thought you'd want to know. But what I really want to do right now is hear from you as to what's going on in your world. If you'd like to participate, I'd really like to know: are you agreeing that jobs in your region, in your world, in the area in which you work, are changing? Are you seeing that shift? Yes. Okay, anybody want to say anything specific about that from their own region? Okay. Are you seeing an increase or a change in the skills that are being demanded? Or are things that people used to be asked for, going down in demand and other things coming up? Yeah.
Definitely noticing digital literacy being so important on so many levels, and especially employers in IT sector are really struggling to meet demands of what skills they're looking for. So it applies, I work personally with youth and young graduates, and even if we think that they're highly trained and IT literate, even that group is not quite meeting demands in the technology sector.
Okay. Thanks. Yep.
I too work with youth and work in a rural division, and find that, for instance, apprenticeships that used to be quite readily available for students that were in high school are hard to find, because that sector is not looking for apprentices at this time in the same way they were a number of years ago.
Okay.
Anyone else?
Hi, I work in construction, so we put a class through SATE. But anyway, so what I really notice is the construction companies are not hiring anymore like they did in the 80s if you had 2 legs and a heartbeat. They want skill. Even if you are just, we run a pre-trades construction class, and the guys coming out are in demand because they have some kind of skill.
Right.
And then from there, they can go into apprenticeship and work up. But there's a real demand for the skilled construction worker like there wasn't back, 10, 20 years ago.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay.
I help facilitate a program that helps people transition into supervisory, excuse me, or management work. And we find that project management is really in high demand. And like the speaker at this morning's earlier panel mentioned, especially agile project management.
Okay.
Anyone else?
So how has that changed the way you work? Any thinking about that? Like, are you still using the same processes, the same tools, the same methods, the same, are you coming into work doing the same kind of thing every day now as you did 5 or 10 years ago? Or has what you've been doing changed? Is your job different today than it was before?
Is that a yes or a no?
Okay, well then, what would you do differently? How would you, if you had better tools, would there be tools that you would like to have to help you do that work? So you're pretty happy with the way things are going, or am I just, it's difficult to formulate.
Or is it too close to the end of the conference and we're between you guys and the bar?
I really appreciate the work you're doing, because it's useful for us to know what the research is on, what are the most recent tools or skills that our unemployed people need to make the transition from, say, oil and gas to something else.
Okay.
So at least that knowledge is useful for us to have at our fingertips to be able to tell them what's the latest.
Okay. Well, and we will be getting to that. So, all right. But if we wanted this session, even though there's a fair number of people here, we wanted people to feel like they could, contribute to the discussion. So please, if you think of something through the course of the rest of the hour, do let me know.
I will.
Okay.
Thank you. So, most of us here at this table with Prospect Human Services, we help people to find employment who have barriers.
Right.
So visible and invisible disabilities, which you know. And when the economy was really good, it was easier, I think, to find entry-level positions for those people.
Right.
And because the higher qualified people were, like, well, quite entrenched in the oil and gas industry, then when the economy tanked, for want of a better word, people with degrees, engineers, were looking for jobs driving school buses, working at McDonald's. Everything shifted,
people had done.
which made it much harder
Mhm.
to find jobs for people who could really, was more suited to an entry-level position.
Right.
So in terms of tools, I don't know about that, but it'd be good if the economy was more diversified and the people who can do those higher level jobs had a place to be, and that would provide more entry-level positions for the rest of other people.
Right.
That's
Right.
my comment.
Okay. Good one. Yeah. Oh, there's something. Get your exercise, Jeff.
For me, I use the career handbook a lot, and when I search in a knock number and then it comes up for transferable skills, I really like to see at the bottom section how it relates to other occupations. So that's a good way to move into these other areas and give
Right.
people an idea of what their transferable skills can do. So if there can be more, I guess, resources in that area and how things can translate to different occupations, that would be helpful.
Very helpful. And we'll be talking about the work we've done towards the update of the Career Handbook in a few minutes. It's based on a paper that Jeff and I wrote and published early last year called Match Up, the case for Pan-Canadian competency frameworks, where we would have exactly that. You would have the competencies that people have, and there's hundreds to choose from, and we would know which competencies at which level were used in which jobs. So if you had your own competency profile and you could see where you were in the number of competencies and at what level you were at each competence, because there's different levels, right? There's entry level versus expert. Then you would be able to see how close you were to another job in that competence and whether you needed to increase your level or not, and what other competencies you would need to develop in order to be ready to apply for that job. And in our perfect world, we'll get there real soon, and we've got some hope to that, but definitely I take your point. So moving on, we took this slide out too. Obviously things didn't get saved properly, but we have got, this reminds me that we do have some handouts. We weren't sure how best to do this. So at the end, if you're interested, we have a copy of this article that was in the Globe and Mail a few weeks ago, where I I was responding to something that came out by the Bank of Canada Governor, Stephen Poloz, who said, we need 500,000 more people in the workforce in this country. And we could get them if we chose persons with disabilities, women, Aboriginal youth, and more immigrants, right? So all of those people who, to some extent, have had barriers to employment. If we went after those people and got them in the workforce, we would have a 2.5% increase in GDP, which sounds wonderful. But I wrote and said, until those people have the skills that we're looking for, they're not going to get jobs, and they're not going to be any better off by saying they are in the workforce than not being in the workforce. So we have to make sure that people have the skills that are required. But the big problem is that nobody knows what those skills are. We have a difficulty in understanding the skills that people have, the competencies that people have, and employers have a real difficulty in telling us exactly what they mean when they say that they need a particular skill. I use the example of communicator quite regularly. What do you mean by a good communicator? Do you mean somebody who can talk to the person next to them on the shop floor? Or do you need somebody who can present to the board of directors? Do you need somebody who can do presentations? Or somebody who can write an email without upsetting the rest of the world? Right? I mean, take that point, right? I have a colleague who pressed reply all once when he shouldn't have, right? I mean, but these are skills. Sometimes it's just forgetfulness, but these are skills that a lot of people still need to learn. So there's that article and a couple of others that are on the table here. If you're interested, we've got handouts for everybody. And
I guess I'm on.
You're on.
Okay. So a few weeks ago, there was a paper that came out from the Royal Bank, Humans Wanted. Anybody read it? Anybody familiar with it? It was the paper that RBC used to promote their Future Launch initiative. Has anybody heard of Future Launch? You must have seen the commercials. They're running during the hockey games. Future Launch is the Royal Bank, their Canada 150 project. And what they've done is they've decided that the youth of the country is not getting integrated into the economy. So they've thrown $500 million, I'd say their money, but if you're a Royal Bank customer, it's your money, and thrown that on the table to create better, more efficient pathways to integrate the kids into the economy, because there's a lot of underemployed youth. It's one target. So they've did I mean, you can find the paper, and they talk a lot about the need for a different way of defining work, a different way of defining jobs, a different way of determining labor market information than the way we do it now with NOC codes. Interestingly, I spoke with Anna Klimvoskaya, who's the Director of Research for the Royal Bank, when they were working on this, and they wanted to use Canadian data for their study and wound up using ONET out of the US because the Canadian data is patently useless. We're really underserved in Canada in terms of the tools that our governments provide to understand what the competencies needed in the economy actually are. But one of the things they came out of this was the robots are coming. There's a set of skills that are going to be absolutely critical in the future if you're going to be able to work. And as Janet mentioned, a lot of that is the things that make us human. So the empathy skills, the ability to communicate, the ability to collaborate, the ability to be creative. Go ahead. So although on the surface we're doomed, in actual fact there's a lot of hope for transitioning people through the economy on the basis of these more human skills. But we need a better way of tracking it, a better way of understanding it, and a better way of developing those skills. The reality is that in the future of work, if all you have are technical skills, we can automate you out of existence. And we're already doing that in many cases. Everybody here, I'm sure, has heard about the truck drivers, the heavy truck drivers up in Fort Mac, right? That's, you know, we think it's really radical. They've actually been doing that in Chile for 10 years in the mines, in the copper mines in Chile and Peru. So it's not new technology. So if we want to be successful, if we want to be useful in the economy, those human skills are absolutely critical. The other thing that we're noticing in terms of trends around this stuff is the idea of batch processing people at the beginning of a career and then leaving them alone for the rest of their career is a bit of a tired notion. We were at a conference the other week down in Indianapolis with the Lumina Foundation, and a lot of post-secondary people were there. How many post-secondary folks do we have in the room? Okay, don't throw anything, but the reality is that the old paradigm is really getting tired, and it's not really responding to the needs of a rapidly changing skills base for the workforce. And the very fact that folks like edX and Coursera and Udacity and all of the rest of the micro-learning platforms have a business model that's allowing them to be successful points to a gap in the way the post-secondaries are delivering skills in the marketplace. So this smaller, more compact bundles of skill that are more readily quantified is a piece that is absolutely critical. Everybody here familiar with open badges? Anyone? Yes, no, maybe? Hands up if you're familiar with open badge technology. Okay. Open badges is a technology that allows micro-credentials to be compared, and the evidence that supports those credentials is embedded in the badge. It's a little bit like a digital Boy Scout badge. Okay. They launched the Open Badges Initiative, 2012-ish. They're up north of 11 million of these things floating around in the ecosystem now, defining little bundles of skill that can be stacked and modularized and compared and used to define someone's actual skill set. Far better than a resume or a degree transcript or anything else. We're seeing in Europe right now, they're actually badging all of the competencies in a bachelor's program outside of the core academic stuff and building that into a portable electronic, what I guess in Europe they refer to as the diploma supplement. And we have transcripts. They have a 50-page diploma supplement that tells you what you actually learned in all those classes that you have marks for. And they're replacing that at a few universities in Italy that I was talking to last fall with open badges for each individual piece of competency over a 4-year education program.
We see that more in Canada right now, I think, is with the IBM and Microsoft credentialing, right? They're using micro badges.
Yeah, IBM is badging everything internally, and they are actually, IBM internal badging, corporate training, is getting people direct entry credit into master's programs in data management at a couple of US universities right now. So where you used to go to school to get a job, now you use the job to get into school. Because the IBM stuff is better than anything that George Mason and Northwestern are doing. And so they're accepting these things as credit, and advanced credit. So the whole world is changing around this stuff. The other one I want to talk about was this idea of the credential engine. Is anybody familiar with that? Anybody? Hands up. Credential engine? Heard of it? Never heard of it. Okay. Lumina Foundation. Everybody heard of Lumina Foundation? Some? Okay. The Lumina Foundation is an education nonprofit in the U.S. They sit on about $1 billion endowment, and their whole purpose is to create a world where, was it 75% of the U.S.?
65.
65% of American citizens have a quality, emphasis on quality, post-secondary credential by 2025, 2020? 2025. So that's their whole reason for existence. They've been working on this thing called the Credential Engine, which is a open-sourced repository of all of the academic, industry, certification credentials, proprietary, whatever, like anything that you could hang on a skill or a competency, and dump it all into this thing called the Credential Engine using a language called Credential Transparency Markup Language, I believe, CTML, anyway. The idea is then you can compare apples to apples across any number of academic programs, any number of industry or professional credentials, certifications, badges, courses, diplomas, degrees, doesn't matter.
Imagine what that will do for the immigrant population when the credential engine has got the credentials from Bangladesh and China and the rest of the world into our credentials, so you can compare exactly. Yeah.
That went live in November. It's out there now. They're slowly filling it up, and they've open sourced it and turned it over to schema.org. They're the same people that look after all of the protocols for the World Wide Web. And so they're putting this out there now and building it out now. Okay? In a few years' time, virtually all U.S. university credentials, diplomas, degrees will be in here, and we're slowly going to be adding stuff from around the world, as Janet mentioned. This is huge. This is going to level the playing field for a lot of people. It's also going to disrupt the post-secondaries because now you can compare apples to apples. And so it's not just reputation of where you got the degree, but what you actually learned while you were there is going to become far more important. So that's bothersome if you're the business agent for a post-secondary. Google, I always refer to them as Godzilla, but they're not even looking at your resume anymore. They're not looking at where you went to school anymore. They only care what you can actually do. They've moved to a full competency-based hiring program now. So they'll do code wars and hackathons and all kinds of other things to test what your actual skill sets are, as opposed to where you went to school, on the presumption that if you're in a computer science program, by the time you graduate, what you were learning on is obsolete and they're not using it in the industry now anyway. So they don't care. They're categorically they're on record as stating that, that traditional credentials are useless. You had something to say?
I have a question. Sure. My question is, so if they're going to look at what people have actually learned in university, are they also going to look at what a person actually needs to learn to do a certain job?
Good thing you mentioned that.
Because it takes 6 years to become a social worker, and maybe they could look at to see what you actually need to be a competent social worker, and it might not be 6 years.
Yeah, that's a really good point, which brings us to my next thing,
Next
I
slide.
think. Actually, no. You know what, I'm going to advance forward here.
Okay.
Let's do this one first, okay? One of the things that we talked about when we were down in Indianapolis talking with the Lumina folks, the folks from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce were there, one of their VPs. And they've always had they've got this issue with the skills mismatch and the skills gap in the U.S. And one of the things was the industries, the employers aren't really good at signaling to the training providers as to what exactly the skills are that are in demand as they shift. Our LMI data in Canada is trailing data based on NOC codes, which are aggregations of multiple occupations, and they're not particularly useful in terms of telling you what the skills that are actually being employed in the economy are. So what the U.S. Chamber is talking about doing, which is music to my ears because it's exactly what we've been banging on about for 10 years now, is creating a better system for signaling that and determining what those skill sets are. So that, like you said, it's 6 years to become a social worker, but you may have acquired a big chunk of that outside of school already. So what's the gap? This is the, we'll get into one of the projects that we're working on, but the idea is to start quantifying actually what is required, finding mechanisms to measure that in people, closing the gaps with micro-learning and badging those with industry-recognized badges, and then getting people to work. From an employer perspective, that opens up your talent pool considerably. And what they're talking about doing, and this week, I think, Jason mentioned they're launching, is this talent pipeline management approach in the U.S. through the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. That's 3 million businesses in the U.S. And what they want to do is start treating the talent pipeline the same way they treat supply chain management, and sending the proper signals up and down that line so that people can integrate into the workforce. If they need reskilling, we know exactly what those reskilling things are, so we can rapidly reskill and put people back to work. If there's gaps, we can figure out what they are and fill them. There was an initiative in the UK a few years ago when they decided that all the healthcare aides in the nursing homes needed to be certified. And so the NHS did what governments do. They went to the colleges and said, okay, what'll it take? And the colleges said, only 18 months of training. And some of these folks have been working as healthcare aides in nursing homes for 20 plus years. And someone said, well, maybe we should see what they actually already know. And the average time it took to train these folks up to get them to get them credentialed so they could keep working wound up being about 9 weeks. And it was only the average because there were a few people who needed a lot of training. Most people didn't need any training at all because they'd been doing the work forever. They knew what it was. So once we quantified what that was, we created this path. I have no idea how many billions of pounds that saved the UK government in not having to send these people back to school for 18 months, let alone not being able to run the nursing homes because everybody who was working in them was no longer qualified, so they had to shut the nursing homes down. I have no idea what that cost, but it's got to be billions and billions of pounds. So what we're talking about is a more efficient way of integrating people into the economy. Okay? Which brings me to the career handbook. You had a question?
But would you say that the workforce or the employers are ready for this change? Because I know as an immigrant, you know, if you want to work in the field that you worked, you would have to look into, you know, certifying your career from, you know, a different country. So are employers more open to hiring people from other countries without having to go to school to, you know, start all over again?
I'll qualify the answer. Employers maybe, and I think employers as a whole are turning around because they need the skills, right? But it's not the employers that are necessarily the problem for the immigrants. It's the certifying bodies who won't recognize their credentials from someplace else. And we're working on those folks too. Okay? It's a tough process and it's slow, but it's starting and it's starting to snowball. If I'd have been up on stage here a couple of years ago talking about this kind of stuff, you'd have called the cops and hauled me out of here because I'm a crazy man, because it'll never happen. The reality is, it's happening. Okay?
I think it's
not
happening.
crazy talk anymore.
It's happening faster in the States right now because they've got a 4-point-something unemployment rate, and they have a low participation rate. So there are places in the States right now that are paying people to move to their town. Come to my town and we'll give you $5,000 to pay off your student loan. There's a shortage of skilled talent in the US. So we're seeing that because of the difference between supply and demand. But that is going to have effects in Canada as well. Even though we don't have quite the unemployment rate and we don't have quite the problem with not having the skilled workforce, it is going to have effects in Canada. It's happening everywhere in the world. We will get there. It just might take a little bit longer. And you know, the idea of hiring on the basis of competence is one thing, but it has to be verified competence, right? We have to be able to assess people to make sure that they have the competencies that they say they have or they should have. And that lies the difference. There's going to be lots of work for assessors in the next little while. So, you know, if you're looking for a career change, that might be it. But that's part of this process, is it can't just be that, well, yeah, I've got it. That's not good enough. It has to be assessed and verified. Or we're going to end up back in the same place as we have been with credentials like diplomas and degrees that said you should have these skills, but not necessarily have you built them through that program. So.
Yeah.
May I ask, who's spearheading this? Like, who's going to fund it all?
That's a good question. Who's going to fund it? Who's spearheading it? I like to think I am. But we've got interest from a number of different levels of government and different agencies within government, both federally and provincially. There are large industry groups that are looking at fixing this. We've been talking with folks like the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, in addition to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We've been talking with the Business Council of Canada. We know that there's a push to shift in this direction. And as I said, I mean, the Royal Bank has thrown $500 million at it. And I can live quite comfortably on a rounding error on that kind of money to keep doing this. But they want to create that infrastructure around that as part of that $500 million. Right now, what's going on, yeah.
Right.
What we're looking at right now, I mean, there's pockets of this going on all over the place. And I said a few years ago, I thought I was living on an island. Turns out I'm still living on an island, but the island actually has a ferry service now between all these other islands that are working on it. And it's not just in Canada, and it's not just one place in Canada. It's all over the world. So those clusters of effort are starting to connect together. Government will fund it. Usually, the problem with government will only fund, they'll get in front of the parade after the parade has already marched off, right? They don't want to innovate around any of this stuff. But government is starting to pay attention at multiple levels. So I think there's going to be funding. There's $75 million on the table for something they're calling the Future Skills Lab.
Yeah.
They still calling it that? It's a really unfortunate name, but there's $75 million of federal money from 2 budgets ago that they haven't spent a nickel of yet. Well, apparently it's sitting there, and apparently they're getting a working group together in the next month or so to actually start looking at how we can integrate this across the country. So there is money available to do it.
But slowly.
Okay, question from the back? Sure. Yeah, we could have a whole conversation over a beer or three around the changing role of the post-secondaries, because I think the role is going to change to assessment, designing learning pathways, and then monitoring individuals along those pathways for their entire lives, as opposed to, here's what you get for 4 years and we'll see you later. Anyway, I want to quickly, because we're running out of time, but career handbook. Someone said they use it a lot. Anybody else use it a lot? Not a lot? Does anybody even know what it is? When we did this project, we had a senior career counselor from Knightsbridge Human Capital on our proposal team who had never heard of it.
Sorry, for this career handbook, is that the NOC, is that with all the position descriptions in it?
It's got some position descriptions in it. It's got some physical characteristics in it. It's got some education requirements in it. It was originally published in 2003 based on the 2001 NOC code and hadn't been updated since. And of course, nothing in careers has changed since 2001, right? So a lot of what was in there wasn't particularly relevant. A lot of the things that were in there had shifted. And the other piece of it was as we started looking at this was the use case around who actually uses this thing and what purpose does it serve. It was serving a very narrowly defined user base, and yet it had the potential to do all kinds of other things. So when we took on the project, we spent a lot of time trying to convince the folks who own it to design the use cases. Like, let's figure out, A, who's using it now, how are they using it now, what are they using it for, what are the results that they're getting, what would they like to see change, and then, more importantly, who else could use it if it had the right information in it and presented in the right ways. What would they use it for? What information would they seek from it? What decisions would they make based on it? And how, what are the consequences of the decisions that they make? And then use that to design a new system. So what we've convinced them of, and it was a horrible fight, and there was blood all over the tables and everything else, but because they kept saying, we just want to update the career handbook. And I kept saying, it's a query on a database. And they said, no, we just want to update the career handbook. And I said, yeah, design a database full of all of this occupational information. Let the natural language programming people get their mitts on it, and let the machines crunch it all up and figure out how it all relates to each other, because that's what machine learning is all about. And then do a query on it based on a NOT code, and it'll tell you everything you need to know. And update it in real time, and great, there's your career handbook. No, we just want to update the career handbook. Eventually, we got them to agree that what they really needed wasn't a career handbook. What they really needed was a comprehensive database of occupationally relevant information that they could relate to particular occupations and or industries, that was updated in real time based on information that the government has, information that industry has, information that other people have, all in one massive agglomeration that we can then keep up to date in real time with real signals from the economy and provide useful information, whether it's to a job seeker, to a job changer, to a kid that has to decide what they want to be when they grow up, et cetera, et cetera. We got them there. It was a tough fight. They've accepted that that's what they need to do now. Whether they, that was
2 months.
2 months ago when we finished that job. We're waiting for them to come out and tell us what next steps are going to be on that. But the next steps are really designing that database and start pulling the information into it. They created a whole new taxonomy, which was basically the old taxonomy. And then they bolted a lot of the stuff that's from ONET onto it. And we've suggested to them, why stop at ONET? Because ESCO in the EU has got the same sort of thing related other ways. Just throw it all on the table and let the machine figure out how it all connects together. We don't have to create a system to connect it all together. The computers can do that themselves now. And so that is going to, we hope, create a tool that's useful for your community, it's useful for employers, it's useful for individuals, job seekers, job changers, and it'll be the basis for a completely revised approach and a new Canada Job Bank that actually puts people to work, which would be a real cool thing, on the basis of what they can actually do, which would also be a really cool thing. So that's, I think, the end of my bit. I think you're up. You want to talk about the next one?
All right.
Any questions about that before we go on? Yes?
So how soon is this going to happen? Because I'm thinking, okay, I should incorporate this into my workshops. But then my clients are going to say, the employers are not doing that right now. So how soon do you think it's going to happen? How soon are the changes?
Good question. It's not my career handbook. It belongs to the federal government, and they move at a glacial pace. But there's a real push on. We fought a lot. We fought tooth and nail with the ACDC around this stuff. But the reality is, there's some people in that department who realize the problem and are really trying to change it. And they're looking at ways to do that as quickly and as efficiently as possible. I can't give you I can't even give you a start time, let alone an end time. But I do know that the people that are involved at that level are absolutely focused on getting this right and making something useful. It's useful for a very limited, in limited things. And they want to expand the utility of it and start including more information on actual skills, more information across a broad range of different competencies, and at a much more granular level than it's currently being done with the Career Handbook. Okay?
Okay.
Go.
If we have time, let's come back to that, because I think there's more we could tell you about what we envision for the Career Handbook. Did you talk to this slide?
Yeah, we've had lots of wow moments already,
Okay.
so I think
All right.
we're done with.
Okay, so why are we talking so much about competencies and the idea of competency profiles and individuals being able to understand what it is that they can actually do? And I found this quote this morning in the paper I was reading from ATB. And here it is. If you don't know why you'd hire you, why will they? So I think that, you spend your days, those of you who are working with individuals as clients who are, looking for work or looking to change jobs, you spend your days helping them to build the resume. You may be moving into a competency-based approach, but it's, they really have to be able to articulate what it is that they can do for that employer. And we need employers to be able to articulate what they need people to do. So the idea is for, in a competency-based situation, is to say, what are the end goals of your business? What is your business? What are you trying to achieve? Then what are the things that need to be done in order to achieve that? Then what are the skills and competencies and knowledge and attributes and attitudes that people need to be able to do that? Because that's a little different than the traditional way of figuring it out, like, oh, I think I need an engineer, or I need somebody with a 2-year diploma, and I need 5 years experience, and that doesn't help in real hiring. So we are working on a project right now to prove that unemployed or underemployed oil and gas professionals in the city of Calgary should be able to transfer their skills to other sectors and other jobs. This is a proof of concept project. It's a research project. We've got the theory in spades. We think we know that this should work. Let's find out if it does. So this project was funded again through ESDC and through the National Essential Skills Initiative. And also we got some funding from the provincial government, from Community and Social Services. I know that you'll be aware of the work that they do in workforce development. So just this morning, I was fortunate enough that we had this article on the CBC online. So if you read CBC, you may have seen it. I've got copies of it over here if you're interested in seeing the article. I think it was a very well-written article. The guy who interviewed me yesterday really got the gist of it quite well, so I was quite pleased. We're looking still for another 80 or so people to be participants in this project, which is why I reached out to CBC and asked if they'd be interested in this story. We've already got 180 people who are putting their competency profiles together on an online platform that is called Global Talent Utility. So we have got for them the taxonomy that would be the sort of thing that would be in the Career Handbook. Now, the taxonomy is just the list of skills, knowledge, attributes, attitudes, physical capabilities, all of those things that you may need to have in the world of work. But when somebody's building their competency profile on this platform, they go in and they say, yep, I'm able to do that. And then we ask them, at what level are you able to do that? And we're asking them to put that right into their profile. They're also adding their resume. They're also adding other things. We're going to be adding a piece on things like workplace culture. Which workplace culture do you prefer to work in? Are you really good in a fast-paced environment where it's go, 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 go until Friday afternoon when everybody goes out for a beer? Or do you prefer to work at a steady pace? These are things that matter to people, and we're going to be able to have them choose that on this profile. At the same time, we're going to be working with employers to get them to start looking at how they can build their available job profiles the same way. Now, we've got more individuals so far. We're starting to work with employers. We've got our first workshop with employers that is scheduled for next week. That's going to be a little harder. Believe me, the oil and gas professionals who've been out of work for 2 years are willing to try just about anything right now, as you probably know. But the employers we want them to be able to say, what are those skills that you're looking for? Sometimes it will be a technical skill that somebody doesn't have. But sometimes it will be management skills and people skills and financial management skills, teamwork skills, communication skills, all of those transferable skills. And because the Office of Literacy and Essential Skills is involved in supporting this work, we are going to be able to assess people, the participants in this project, on their level of skill. So they'll self-assess, and then we're actually going to put them through the TOWS test and other assessment to actually verify what their level of skill on some of these transferable skills are, the essential skills. And I know some of you in the room will know what I'm talking about by essential skills. And we're going to actually assess not just reading, writing, and our document use and numeracy, we're going to actually get into some of those other essential skills as well. We've devised ways for assessing those that have not yet been standardized. But that's not enough. It's not enough to have individual profiles and job profiles. We need the magic that can happen online and within the machine to figure out what's the level of match between these people and potential new jobs. And so that's the next phase. We'll be doing some matching of people. And then I'm assuming that there will be a skills gap. Otherwise, they'd probably be employed. But what is that skills gap? And then how can they fill that gap? What is the fastest way possible in Calgary to fill that skills gap? Is it through SAIT? Is it through Mount Royal? Is it through Bow Valley College? Is it through one of these online course programs to fill those skill gaps? And it's a research project. We don't know how it'll turn out. We've told people, don't expect that we'll be able to match you with a perfect match with a job. But at least by the end of this project, we should have had you thinking in terms of those transferable skills, and we should be able to show you what potentially could be new careers for you.
When is the end of your project?
Oh, it's coming up too fast. We really want to have all of the research piece of this done by the end of June, certainly no later than the end of July. I've got to have the reports written and prettied up and ready for publication by the end of the summer. So yeah, we should have some real good data for us, for people by the end of the summer, and I look forward to sharing that far and wide. We have a multitude of partners in this project. As I mentioned, the funders, we've got Jeff at Griffiths Shepherd. We're working with the Gold Mine Project, which is a group in Calgary that is working with unemployed professionals looking to find new work. Global Talent Utility is the platform that we're using. Vametric is another online platform, which is where we're going to be housing the assessed portfolios to show that people have skill. And SAIT is already on site as a learning provider, but we know that we'll have Mount Royal and Bow Valley College as well. So these are, those are the partners. And I want to say that this project is something that is based right in Calgary right now, but I know that you are from across this province, and the next project that I want to get started is one where we go into a coal town, and work with them to figure out what is the competency profile of the town. And in fact, Jeff and I are getting in the car and we're going up to Hannah tomorrow. We're going to talk to the Cactus Corridor Economic Development Group to see, whether there's a fit there. Because I understand that the people of Hannah are very dependent on the coal mine there and the coal-fired generating plant. And when that plant gets shut down, and the potential is that the mine will close, then even some of the farmers who depend on the salaries from the coal mine will be running into difficulty. I know that the government of Alberta is really strongly hoping that we can mitigate the effects of these coal changes, or the changes in the use of coal across the province. The reason I'm so passionate about this work, and I'm a public policy person, I want to be able to tell the government and other decision makers what's the best thing to do when it comes to workforce development and deployment, is because we've seen it happen in oil and gas. 10 years ago, we saw it happen in manufacturing in Ontario. Is it 15 now? We're going to see it happen in coal. We're seeing it happen with the robots that are coming. We're going to have workplace disruption as part of life. And so what I want to be able to do is show that a competency-based approach will help to mitigate the effects of that, not just for individuals, but for regions, for small towns, for big cities, and in fact for the whole country. So these are proof of concept projects that I'm dreaming up and working with my partners who are fantastic in helping me get this done. So just wanted to let you know that we're not too Calgary-centric. I know that the Oil and Gas Worker Project is. But if it works here for oil and gas professionals, it could work in the rest of the province for oil and gas people who've been displaced from their roles in the sector as well. And so we'll see. And so.
Yeah, so I guess to sum it up, the new tools are coming. They're being developed. In an ideal world, we'd have a full toolkit for you that you could take out of here. You just pick it up on at the door on the way out. We're not there yet, but this change that's coming around competency is going to impact the way you folks do business. It's going to impact the way you serve your clientele. And we hope make life better and simpler and many other things, but it will change things. And so there's going to be it's not only the reskilling and retraining of the workforce, but there's going to be retraining and reskilling for your profession as well, because there's going to be a whole new set of really, really, really sophisticated computer-based tools, we hope, to help you with what you're trying to do. In the end, I guess we wanted to open up the floor to you guys, questions, answers. We'll answer as much as we can. If we don't have an answer, we'll lie to you. But, are you guys ready for this? Is this going to be useful to you? If there's specific things that the career development people need immediately to push this kind of stuff along, that's helpful, because again, we're trying to get various levels of government and industry and everything else involved in making these changes. So we open up the floor to you guys. I know it's probably almost 4 o'clock now, right? Okay. But if there's any questions, concerns, comments, you want to throw things, that's fine. Just let me know so I can get out of the way. But yeah, it's for you guys. Like, helpful, useful, waste of my time, let me know now and I'll stop doing it. But anybody?
From what I heard today, most of it, I thought it was a great presentation, thank you. Would be, I see a really big surge in a need for life skill coaches.
what?
throughout,
Sorry?
throughout the sector.
Okay. Anybody else? Life skills are going to be critical, and I think that was one of the big things that came out of the Humans Wanted report from RBC, is the need for, the things that the things that are going to make us viable economically as humans are really the things that make us human. Because the other stuff, if we have to compete against the machines on speed and accuracy and all those other things, we've already lost. So it's about creating workplaces and creating an economy where the human element is the most important for the people. That's not currently the case, I don't think. But the life skills and the collaborative skills and the social skills are a huge, huge piece. For anybody who's involved in STEM education is going to become STEAM education. And the arts and humanities are already taking on a much bigger role in creating the workforce of the future. Anybody else? Oh.
Hi. You mentioned that you were doing some research with American sources and also some European sources. Are you working together with them? Is this project going to be joint? It seems to me there would be a lot of overlap between.
Interesting that you should ask that. We would love to create a global internet of skill. It's a term I always use. Right now we're collaborating and sharing information with these other agencies and other people. There's no one project to connect it all. But there was a paper that came out this morning, actually, from the Wilson Center in Washington, talking about a North America-wide workforce development initiative and harmonization of competency standards across all of NAFTA. And, that's step one. We know that between Erasmus, which is at the post-secondary level in the EU, and between the various countries in the EU, they've got ways of comparing apples to apples across 28 sovereign nations in the EU. We have a free trade agreement with the Europeans that says mutual and joint recognition of professional credentials between Canada and the EU. And right now we can't do it between Alberta and Saskatchewan. So there's a push to harmonize all this stuff on a global basis, but there's no one project yet to do that. But a lot of the people working on this are talking to each other because it just makes sense to do that.
One of the things that's going on in the States right now is with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce is that they have created academies that where they're teaching local organizations that are workforce development organizations, so probably the kinds of organizations that you represent, that they're teaching them how to go to employers and get them to start thinking in this way, to start using a competency approach to define their jobs and the tasks of their jobs. And so when we were talking to this guy who's with the U.S. Chamber last week, he said, we'd sure love, because he's got a southern accent, to bring this program up to Canada, to find a way to work with you there, to work with a particular region or a particular sector, or just to start a pilot in Canada to start working with workforce development agencies to help teach employers in that sector or that region. So that is something that we're looking at as a potential project as well. The trick, of course, is always who's going to fund it, but I think that this one, that particular one, would be well funded through Chambers of Commerce here. So that's something else. There's just not enough hours in the day, eh, Jeff?
No, but I mean, sleep is something we'll do eventually.
Okay.
Right? But yeah, I mean, the big thing for me, like I said, a couple of years ago, with banging my head against the wall on this stuff, and it wasn't a thing. And no one was talking about it. And all of a sudden, it's a thing. And there's stuff going on, and it's gaining momentum, and it's starting to snowball. Even 6 months ago, this wasn't even really a thing yet. And here we are in May of 2018, and it's a thing, and it's happening. And it's starting to gather momentum, and it's starting to take on a life of its own. Not that long ago, it felt like, you know, we were in a war trying to change things, and now it feels like we've won. They can't really stop us anymore. This is going to happen. It's just a question of how we can shift it so that it happens and it's for the benefit of the people that need the work.
So how many companies do you think in Calgary are using this approach? And who, do you know, have you identified some of these companies here in Calgary? And if not, that was more my question. How long do we have to wait for that?
So for this project, we said to the government, we'll talk to 20 employers. Well, Global Talent Utility wants to talk to 300. We're not there. We don't have 20 yet, but we are finding people who are interested. We were at Jeff was at the HR Professionals Conference a couple of weeks ago and snagged a few people, but mostly the people at Global Talent Utility have been talking to employers for quite a long time now, and they've got quite a few lined up. I just don't know exactly how many, but I can tell you that some of them are big. Some of them might be really big employers, and once we get some of the really big employers in the oil patch and outside of the oil patch that are starting to think in these terms, then the tipping point will happen. So they've got a number of IT companies. They've got, I think I heard them say they had an airline. I think I heard them say they had a big insurance company. They had
one of the big utilities as well
one
as
of the big
jumping
utilities.
on board.
Right. So some of the bigger ones are interested in starting, you know, baby steps for them as well, right, to see if that will work for them. But yes, the work is being done, and we're very hopeful that before the end of this project, we will have way more than 20 or 30 employers who've started to post their job profiles in this way on this platform.
Any other questions?
I'm sorry, what's the, can you repeat the name of the platform where?
Yes, it's called Global Talent Utility, okay? And if you Google that, you'll find them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they're a live thing. That's a going entity, and they're involved in this on the research side, but they're actively promoting what they're doing. I think they either have or they are about to sign on with one of the larger Aboriginal training groups in the country around exactly trying to track what the competencies are in those communities. So I mean, it's a thing, and it's happening.
You can go on to Global Talent Utility, and for free, you can start building your own competency profile, and so can your clients if you're so interested. We're using workshops to help people guide their way through it right now because it's not as intuitive a platform as we want it to be, but it's getting there. They're making good changes to it all the time. Anything else? So what do you want me to tell the government about what career developers, career counselors, career professionals need in order to do a better job? What do you want me to tell them?
Buzz off. Tell them to buzz off. Well, one of the things, like listening to your presentation, like for me, like it's really scary to hear this information. Like say for instance, like they're, your co-presenter there was saying something about the robots are coming. And we don't know how long this is going to take. And, you know, like the developing the career competencies and stuff like that, like what would be the point? Like if, you know, like every day, like these big companies are going to be replacing our jobs, like that's really scary. And in 10 years, like by the time I retire, like is there going to be any jobs in 10 years?
Well, that's a really scary thought. But what we're hearing is that it's not that the jobs are going to go. The jobs are going to change. But if you think back, I'm old enough, I started my career in accounting. I used to do all the accounting in a general ledger by paper and pencil, right? I'm seeing some nods, and people know what I'm talking about. Now, nobody knows how to do that by hand anymore. It's all done by computers. What's going to happen, and I really do believe this, is that yes, some people will find their jobs displaced. Other people are going to find that they've got a robot or a machine, a high-level thinking machine right next to them, and they're working together. You know, when the chess champion was first beaten by a computer, Boris, what's his name? They thought, well, that's it. That's the end of chess for people, right? Now, if the computers can play chess against people and the computers will always win, then what's the use of people playing? But now they have found that if a person and a computer play chess together against another team, that they can win, that, you know, the people can be involved in winning. So I think that that's what, you know, what is important to remember, that just like we all had to get along with computers to do our word processing and write our emails and do our, do all the, you know, the letters or the writing that we do or the keeping of our books and accounting. And let's face it, we're all using very smart phones right now too, right? So we've got access to the internet. We have learned how to use that. Now we're going to have to learn how to work with better, more intelligent machines. But I don't think we're all going to find ourselves out of work. Although there was somebody at the conference last week that was saying, yeah, we're all going to be out of work, but that's okay because we're all going to find our joy in the rest of life, and it's all going to be glorious, and it's just going to be awkward for the next few years. But mostly, I'm hearing that the jobs will be affected by this, but not replaced by machines. Yes, that's right. Yes, we'll all have ways to be happy.
Anyone else?
I don't want to belittle your worry, though. I do think that there's, you know, for some people there's going to need to be an adaptation, and those life skills, those people skills, those essential skills are going to be more and more important. So the work that you do in your own work or with the people in your organization that do the development of those skills, that's going to be more important than ever, and it has always been important.
Yeah. Anyone else? We are between you guys and either home or the pub or whatever it is that comes after at 4 o'clock. This is the last session of the conference, isn't it? Okay. Anything else then before we wrap? We do have some materials here, some of the backgrounders on some of the stuff we've been working on. If you're interested, if you want to come and jaw for a bit, we'll be here for a while. Thank you, and hope we'll be in touch, hopefully in the future.